I see a country that's expanded its social welfare net to 16.4 million South Africans who receive a grant every month. We can talk about whether that's a good or a bad thing, but the World Bank last year said that this was a very essential poverty relief mechanism and that it showed it was up there with what Brazil has done to yank so many people out of poverty as it has done. I see a country mostly that doesn't take shit, and I think that that's a very important part of our DNA. A march was held against corruption across the country, from Pretoria, Cape Town, Durban, and in Johannesburg. Yes, it was small, but I think what we finally have are the makings of a proper anti-corruption movement in South Africa. I'm certainly going to join it because I do think we live in an era of looting. But we are not people who sit down and take this. We protest and we go to court. We write. I see a very active and vibrant democracy. We've had 4 presidents in 20 years. And I think that that fundamentally breaks the pattern of post-colonial Africa, of hanging on for dear life. We've already broke it by the time Madiba gave up after serving just 1 term. Personally, I really love our Constitutional Court. So earlier this year, after we experienced the awful xenophobia, I went along there with friends and family to a protest of hundreds of people, perhaps even a couple of thousand, to say that this wasn't part of our Constitution. And that court and our Constitution is a real living document. If you consider that what happened at Marikana, the awful killings of those miners, will probably end up there as Dali Mpofu and his lawyers charge the state, sue the state for R1 billion for all the families of those who were killed and for those who were injured. In addition, in February next year, I think a pretty amazing thing is going to happen at that court. Julius Malema, along with the DA, will take the Nkandla misspending to the Constitutional Court on the eve of the State of the Nation address. That's going to be a real moment, a turning point, I think, for our country. So I also see me, I think, a successful black woman who only got where I was able to get because of affirmative action. Otherwise, I think I might have only reached being able to be a banker or a clothing worker, which was the predetermined destiny for people like me. If it hadn't been for affirmative action, I don't think about 6 million of us would have enabled what was a quite healthy growth in our country until up to about 4 years ago. So I went to Nigeria last week, and then I came home absolutely delighted to be here, because from the moment I applied for that visa, I was shaken down until I left. Great country, exciting, energetic, but I think it's gone too far off track. And the reason I was happy to get home was because I think that we still very much can get onto a faster track. Gautrain, another example of what we can do. I came back delighted to be here, just living here, the spring blossoms, being able to eat out. I love the purple haze of the coming jacarandas. Mostly I love our diversity and a sense of hope. So obviously I think we can ask survival stories about our country, and we are a fairly apocalyptic nation. I think we often ask, where are we going? What happens when Mandela goes? What happens when the ANC is voted out? But I don't think that we are Kunduz or the Central African Republic. Hell, I don't think we're even Greece, because those are, I think, genuinely failed states. And we don't get onto, we're not at all on Foreign Policy magazine's set of indicators of what a failed state is. Of course, I know there are things we need to do almost immediately. I think electoral reform has to be the first one, because I've covered every single ANC conference after apartheid ended, and honestly, from what the first ANC conference was in the early 90s to the last one I attended at Mangaung, it's very, very dangerous. It's easy for people with money to completely sway who becomes premier, who becomes president. And we now have a situation where something called the Premier League, which is the premiers of Mpumalanga, the Free State, and Northwest, each of whom have large business portfolios and therefore lots of money, have already swung 2 ANC conferences of the Youth League and the Women's League in their favor. So that's just an example. So unless we don't have some measure of directly electing our representatives, a mixed representation model, I think our politics will become fundamentally corrupted. And then I think the thing that business must pay very close attention to is to get 3 million young people into jobs, the country as a whole, because I think that is our greatest threat to stability. So I'm looking with great interest at Hollard and Nando, as well as Pick and Pay, have started something called the Harambee Youth Job Accelerator. And for me, initiatives like those by business are the way forward. So I would think those two steps would place us in a safer place. I'm looking with great interest at next year's local government elections to see whether you'll see a fracturing of this massive ANC election voting bloc. I suspect if there is, though, it's going to go to Julius Malema, because we sat here before the last election and predicted he'd get 2%, he got a little more. I think he'll easily double by next year what he won in the last national election.